We all live life forwards, but I think it's probably best understood backwards, from the end, retrograde, from your end, from your death. But by then, it's too late to do anything about it. Or is it? I've worked as a doctor now for about 20 years, looking after patients in that thick fog between life and death in the intensive care unit. And I've cared for hundreds of patients who have had a cardiac arrest, who had died, at least temporarily, and yet survived. And I've long thought that it's those people we should be listening to rather than tech billionaires or business gurus, because they know what's important in life and what isn't important in life. And I think of these people who I've met through follow-up clinics, through meeting them in the community, a little bit like superheroes, but with absolutely no powers at all. And you can see 10 of them here. There's Jen in the top, who had a heart transplant. I met Jen's heart before I met Jen, because it's in a museum in a glass jar in London. There's Ed down the bottom, who was struck by lightning the same time as his friend was struck by lightning. And Ed survived, and yet his friend died. But in fact, they don't have superpowers at all. Because if Toby Maguire was bit by a spider, he would probably have leukemia, not the ability to stick to walls. And it's the same for these people. The abilities they have are actually very normal abilities, but abilities that we all forget about. And I hope today I'm going to tell you about 3 of these people and give you some solid tools to take back to practice with you, as well as back to life, and hopefully use them in practice. Now, this is my superpower. This is where I feel comfortable and relaxed in work. And if I'm having a bad day or a flat tire or a tax bill, meeting people like this pulls me back to reality. It gives me that flash of what's really important in life. And since doing follow-up clinics and meeting these people when they survive, I've been writing down in this little red book. This is my daughter's Harry Potter notepad that I grabbed on the way to hospital one morning. And I've been writing down some of the things that people say. One of the things says, things are not important. The most important things in life are not things. That's one thing that it says. It says, you're not your worst mistake. And the one at the bottom just says, fuck it. If I'm honest, I think that's my daughter's when I asked her to tidy her room. So that's not from a patient. But today we're going to talk about some of these, what I call whispers of life from different patients. And we're going to start with a patient you've all met at some point or another. This is Mike. Mike loved fishing. He loved fishing partially to have some space for his own time. He liked going to remote environments when there was nobody else around. That's when he felt most content and happiest. But he didn't feel most content or most happy one day when a big wave in South Wales swept him out to sea and Mike drowned. This is actual GoPro footage from the time where he's blue, in cardiac arrest, about to have CPR, and there's a video about that, which is pretty graphic as well. And then next to Mike is the person who rescued him, who ran into the sea in her own clothes, who dragged Mike to the shore, who started CPR. And the reason that happened was because Mike was not alone. We are all never alone. In fact, he was surrounded by a sea of strangers with unique skill sets to help him. Walking on the beach was a CPR instructor. Up on the headland was Alicia, this lady here, who is a police CCTV operator, perfectly tuned to spot minor changes in the scene that she was looking at, and she saw Mike drown. She's also a competitive open water swimmer in that area. There was a Coast Guard off-duty walking on the shoreline. There was an off-duty nurse just around the corner. So in fact, Mike was completely surrounded by a sea of strangers, which is why he survived. And in fact, the way we can put this into practice is through thinking about a toaster. This is a toaster, believe it or not. This is a very expensive toaster. This took Thomas Ways, an MA art student in London, 9 months to make. It cost £1,500. And that was because he wanted to make every single component of that toaster from first principles. The plastic was from a tree. The copper in here, he mined from Wales. He smelted in a microwave that he made himself. And it took him 9 months. It cost £1,500. He plugged it in and it exploded. And the point he was making is that we're at such complexity today with the division of labour. We cannot all be islands. We cannot operate in life as islands. We all need a sea of strangers in order to live normal life, yet alone survive a cardiac arrest. And yet in hospital, sometimes it doesn't feel like that. We heard yesterday from Peter Brindley about followership and leadership, and maybe I'll give you a slightly different way to think about that and maybe take that into your own practice. And that's by using this new phenomenon, which is all over the news this morning. It's all over the news channels every day this month, which is people with what we call main character syndrome. So these are people who feel they are the main character in the world, in their lives, perhaps in their hospital. And we all need to have main character syndrome sometimes. You need to grab that scalpel, make that leadership decision, talk to the family about those difficult things. But it's equally important to be an NPC, a non-player character, for any other gaming geeks here today. And this can be thought of in a few ways. Roger Federer, the tennis player, recently gave a commencement speech in America. And he said in that speech that although he had won 84% of all matches in his career, he'd only won 52% of points. And his point was, winners are just people who know how to lose better. And when you realize you are surrounded by powerful NPCs, that lady on the beach who is a CPR instructor, that person up in the headland who's a CCTV operator, as main characters in our game, sometimes at work, we can lose. And we can lose because there's other people there to help back us up. And perhaps the take-home way to remember that is a quote by another Welsh author, Dylan Thomas, who said, "The purpose of power is to give it away." And I think that's a super powerful thing that we can all do in medicine, and perhaps other people in the realm of the world who have main character syndrome need to learn this phrase a little bit more. So we're going to move from Mike, who we've all met at some point, someone who's drowned, someone who's survived, to somebody who perhaps really does have superpowers. This is Roberto. Roberto still holds the record for the world's longest cardiac arrest. He was a climber in Milan. He was caught in a snowstorm in the Dolomites. He had over 9 hours of cardiac arrest, 4.5 hours of Lucas and physical CPR, and the remaining time with ECMO. In fact, there may be somebody in the room today who actually cared for Roberto and helped save his life. I'm not going to tell Roberto's story. I'm going to let him tell it himself.
Per me essenzialmente l'arrampicata è puro divertimento. Quando sono in parete che scalo, sono da solo, non ci sono tutti i problemi della vita di tutti i giorni. Il tempo si ferma.
Una lunghezza di 8 ore e 40 minuti, se me lo dicevano prima che accadesse, non ci avrei creduto, perché dico è troppo tempo.
So Roberto was caught in a snowstorm on a ledge with a friend. His temperature was down to about 23, 24 degrees. Not the lowest surviving temperature. That goes to a British teacher who got to around 19 degrees and survived. When they first winched Roberto off the mountain, they applied Lucas. They had to go on 2 different helicopter journeys, 2 different ambulance journeys. And Roberto's mum is actually a cardiologist. She used to tell Roberto a story of how she gave CPR in the back of an ambulance to a patient back in the 90s. It was an extraordinary save. It happened in the back of an ambulance. It was very dramatic. So when she heard the story about her son having had 9 hours with asystole, she was convinced that he was going to die. But he didn't die. He survived. He had a prolonged stay in ICU. He needed some grafting, but he lived. But when he did wake, he remembered nothing. Nothing about the incident, nothing about him, nothing about his life whatsoever, absolutely zero. But that all changed, and it all changed with something pretty
4
powerful.
ore e 20 di massaggio cardiaco con Lucas e poi altre 4 ore e 20 di ECMO prima che il cuore dipartisse.
Non è facile da descrivere perché non c'è un primo ricordo nitido. E quando mi ha messo davanti il telefono, hai fatto partire il video, schiacciato play. In un secondo mi è venuto in mente tutto, non solo della scalata, anche dei giorni prima, la preparazione con Alessandro, si è accesa una lampadina.
So he was shown the actual GoPro footage that his friend and he took during the climb, and in that instant of looking back, everything came back. His entire memory came back. Now, this is probably, I think, the coolest photo of all time that anyone has ever taken, if you're Jim Morrison surrounded by Bruce Lee and Jimi Hendrix. But on my phone, I checked this morning, I've got 18,000 photos. I'd like you to look at your phones now and have a look on your photo app, how many photos you have on there. I'd like a record. The record in any talk so far has been 75,000. If anyone can beat 75,000, please put your hand up. Has anyone beaten 17,000? Anyone got 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, 80,000, 88,000? Any bids on 88,000 photos? So there is the same number of photos uploaded to social media per day as heartbeats in our life. There's 3.5 billion photos uploaded. And yet what we don't do is look at those photos, okay? It'd be impossible to look at 88,000 photos. But what I now do, every photo I take, I look back at a photo a year ago, 5 years ago, a decade ago. And the reason for that is nostalgia is an absolutely powerful emotion that we don't exploit enough in many ways in medicine. And I'm going to give you one solid way of maybe exploiting that in medicine. But another way of looking back and reviewing is actually to look at what patients say about us when they do survive. If anyone's bored this afternoon, look through the Google reviews of your own hospital. I looked at mine just before coming here. That's a pretty good one. 5 stars. But not everybody is a glass half full person. The next one, amazing, they saved my life. My heart had stopped multiple times. 4 star. 4 stars. Come on. And yet, at the same time, there are some people in life who are glass half full. Rude staff, filthy toilets, dangerous wards. They killed my nan. Nice Costa, free parking, 2 stars. But as well as looking back at reviews, how can we use nostalgia in our everyday practice to impact on patients? Well, we now know we all have 2 lives. The second begins when you realize you just have one. But you also have 2 lives as you're walking around life normally. We have our experience in self and we have our remembering self. Our experience in self can only experience things in the moment, which maybe take an hour or so, an amazing trip on a helicopter to see the Matterhorn. Our remembering self will remember that forever. It's actually more powerful in many ways than our experience in self. And this study came out of a study that Kahneman and others did, actually looking at endoscopies in hospital. So they gave randomized people to 2 options, a 15-minute endoscopy, which was moderately unpleasant, or a 15-minute endoscopy, which was moderately unpleasant, with an extra 2 minutes on the end of doing nothing. Kind of sham endoscopy, just leaving the probe somewhere subtle, not really doing anything. And that was not unpleasant. And if people could choose, they actually chose the longer endoscopy. Even though the sum of unpleasantness was probably more, they remembered those last 2 minutes. And that's pretty powerful as doctors who do procedures. How can you make people's satisfaction and give you 5 stars? Spend longer doing things. And perhaps at the end of those procedures, which are non-time critical, do a bit more stuff which doesn't matter. Extend it out by a minute, even just 2 minutes. Have some nice chat at the end of that awake central line, putting the dressing on, cleaning things up, because our experience in self will remember that and will review you perhaps 5 stars on Google rather than 4. The next person we're going to talk about is this chap. This is Rhys Thomas. Rhys is an international rugby player. I first saw him play Wales versus Italy in the 1990s. He was the peak of his performance. He was one of the fittest fly halves, originally from South Africa. He was just sold to a French team for the biggest multi-million contract in Welsh rugby. And then Rhys had a massive heart attack whilst at the gym, whilst on an ergo bike, whilst pushing him to the extreme. And in a flash, Rhys changed from the peak of his performance to somebody who needed an LVAD to survive. He was on the super urgent transplant list, had an LVAD as transition therapy, but rapidly it became obvious that finding a match was hard, partially because of his South African roots. When I met Rhys, living in a small town in Wales, he still had the LVAD. He's the world's longest LVAD patient, coming up to 12 years. He still had no pulse, if you felt his pulse. And yet his journey to this smiling photo was not easy. And in fact, all of our journeys through life can be punctuated by tough times. Rhys had made lots of bad life choices in that time after he had his LVAD implanted. Coming to terms with that was tough. He would often wake up in a police cell with the batteries on his LVAD flashing, with just minutes left of battery life, with just minutes left of Rhys's life. And we all meet people in the intensive care unit, in the ED, in our own lives, who have made bad choices. And that can feel tough. It can feel tough when you think about the ethics of it, the justice of it. But in actual fact, we are not the same person as we were yesterday. We change massively through life. Every 7 years, every cell in your body is different. You are not physically the same person as you were 7 years ago. And this might have implications on how we consider those ethical or unethical choices that people make. This is Derek Parfit, the Oxford philosopher, who wrote the book Reasons and Persons. And he did a lot of work back in the 90s about a concept called future persons. It was weird niche work at the time, before thoughts of climate change and the future. And now, Parfit's work on future persons is probably some of the most impactful philosophy we have. And he described the case of the ship of Theseus, which is a ship made of wood, and every day you change one plank of wood on that ship. And after a year, or with our bodies, after 7 years, not a single plank on that ship is the same. And he poses the question, is it the same ship? And in fact, our relationship to our past selves is much further away in physicality and in ethics than it is to our future selves. That can lead to radical self-acceptance. It can lead to radical forgiveness of those people that we see who make bad choices in the intensive care unit. And he goes on to state the fact that actually we are all living in a soup, as he calls it, of moral luck. I drink too much sometimes. I drive too fast sometimes. I say things that I regret sometimes. And yet I don't end up like Rhys. I don't end up in the intensive care unit. I don't crash my car and kill somebody and end up in jail. And the reason for that isn't because I'm any different. It's luck. It's moral luck. And so next time you're seeing a patient in the intensive care unit who's made really tough, bad life choices, just think of the ship of Theseus, think of moral luck, perhaps think of the fact that you are not your worst mistake. Or the other phrase to think about it is the time to make up your mind about somebody is never. And that can also be relevant for us as clinicians who make errors, who make mistakes. You know, you are not that mistake. You are not the summation of all of that. Okay, so I've talked through some of the cases of these people. There's many more in a book I've written called The Second Act, What Nearly Dying Can Teach Us About Really Living. And all of them have survived thanks to something simple, something magic, thanks to CPR, something you don't need to be a doctor to do. In fact, it's estimated that Resusciani has saved around 2 million lives, trained around 500 million people to do CPR. And the face of Resusciani, although she looks like a combination between Anneka Rice and Jimmy Savile, the face actually comes from a lady who died in the Seine back in the 1800s, known as La Canute de la Seine, the unknown lady of the Seine. And it's also inspired the Michael Jackson song, Annie, Are You Okay, for example. A lot of people have been asking me in the wake of the book being published, do you think there's an afterlife? And the answer I give to them is absolutely yes. But not for the person who's died, for the people who are left behind. And I think bereavement support, which is why I'm wearing this little silver star, which is a bereavement organisation, is something we need to get a lot better at. We talk about saving a life in ICU. We seldom talk about saving a death. And actually, if we think about that experiencing and remembering self, we can perhaps sometimes have more impact on bereavement support than we can on life support. And again, one simple thing you can do, it's said that not only do we have two lives, but we have two deaths. You first die when your body dies. You next die when somebody stops saying your name. And so when you do meet people, when people have died, ask them about that person. If they say, my mum has died, say, I'm sorry about that. What was your mum's name? What did she like doing? And you can extend that out to family discussions where I now use the empty chair technique. So after the end of that discussion, I'll often point to a chair and say, if your dad was here sitting with us now, hearing how ill he is, hearing that he's sick enough to die, what would he say? And that often gives people the kind of permission to talk through that person rather than about them. So think about using the empty chair technique. Now, I got to the end of writing the cases for this book. I'd sent it off to the editor, but there was something missing. I couldn't get close to the experiences of people who had had this experience of surviving and dying. And then I happened to go to my auntie's funeral, actually. This is my Auntie Wynne. She was 97. She lived an extraordinary life. She was in the Churchill war rooms on D-Day. And she died a good death, so to speak. And her funeral was amazing. It had all the people she loved. It had all the things she liked, her favourite music, her favourite food. And people kept saying, oh, she would have loved that. And then it got me thinking. I said we all have two lives. The second begins when you have one. You understand your life backwards rather than forwards, but it's too late by that time. So why don't you have your own funeral? So that's what I did. I took the lessons from each of these 10 people and tried to put them into place in a funeral. I first wrote to the vicar in the local village and I said I'd like a funeral, and they said you have to be Christian and dead. That was a bit awkward. So instead we went away to a beautiful cottage in the Pyrenees. There was a group of 8 of us. It wasn't just me. I'm not that narcissistic. And we all used the lessons that we'd learnt on life. We had our favourite music. We all had a eulogy written. We had our favourite readings read out. We had our favourite food. And it was generally one of the best days of my life. And if it's okay with you, I'm just going to read a very short passage from what the celebrant at that funeral read out. And for those who struggle to think about death and the end, you might want to put your iPad earphones in, because this might be a little bit hard to hear. So we had a professional celebrant who came and ran the service with us in the south of France. And this is what he said. I have great pleasure to formally declare you all dead. That's it. It's all over. You can't see your loved ones again. You can't achieve anything again. You can't touch, feel, smell, emote again. You are blackness. You're gone. You do not exist. You are dead. Your time is up. Your legacy begins. What is your legacy? Who and what have you left behind? How do you feel about your life so far? How do you feel about what you have done and said on this planet in the short time you have had here? Because today is your funeral. Today is the day your loved ones will unite in grief to say goodbye. What does it mean to hear the words of your loved ones in their eulogy? What does it mean to experience dying today? How will this change you in the future? What does it mean to hear that today is your funeral? And, you know, this wasn't about death. This is about life. It was genuinely a beautiful place. My friend Carlo played our music choices. And if anyone wants a great playlist for funerals, this QR code links to them. This is the final countdown, by the way, acoustic version. My choice was Night Swimming, REM. There were some comedy choices that you can imagine as well. This is the celebrant mark on the end. We had fresh homemade gnocchi from my Sicilian friend. And of course there was red wine, but it was the first time that the celebrant had ever conducted a service which ended with about 8 naked men in a hot tub crying. We also had some art done at the time that we all have a little section of. Again, this wasn't about death, this was about life. And we finished the service with the following passage, which I'm going to leave you with today to have a little think about. Welcome back. You are not dead. You are alive. You have a second chance, a life 2.0. You don't need to die to reflect on life. But remember today that in 100 years, you will be dead. Someone else will live in the home you worked so hard to build. Someone else will own all of your things. Your car will be scrap metal, your wedding ring on someone else's finger you have never met. Your descendants will hardly know who you were. You may be a portrait on a wall, but your history, your photos, your videos will be digital dust. You won't even be in anyone's memories. And I say this not in the name of nihilism, nor despair. I say this to scream at you for hope and for freedom. Think about this again, and then think about the 95% of things that you have worried about just today. They don't matter. Nothing is really yours. Nothing truly belongs to you. You borrowed time, people, memories, joy, much like books from a library. Some pages will be stained with tears, others with coffee. Some might go missing. But your story will end, your book will return to the shelf, and someone else will borrow it. So make this fact change your story now. You don't need to die to get to life 2.0. You don't need to be like the people in this book who had a cardiac arrest. Life gets easier when you realize life's not getting easier. If this is rock bottom, at least you're on solid ground. The world is so beautiful, life's so short. Don't let your life be wasted on living. Don't let your funeral be wasted on your death. Thank you very much.